optical fidelity that borders on perfection, world-class autofocus and image stabilization refined to the absolute limit, engineered to operate reliably from the humid tropics to the frozen tundra. This is the OM System M.Zuiko 50-200 f2.8 IS Pro. Welcome, I'm Thomas Eisl, professional photographer and visual artist. The M.Zuiko 50-200 IS Pro is more than just a tool. It is a statement, a testament to what is truly possible within the OM system. In this in-depth review, I will uncover its secrets to present you with the most complete picture of this shining beacon of optical performance. But as we all know, where there is light, there is usually shadow. Or is there? Let's find out. There is no doubt that the OM System 50-200 f2.8 IS Pro was designed with the professional sports and wildlife photographer in mind. Built to endure even the harshest weather conditions and professional working environments, design, build quality and overall engineering are critical aspects of such a lens. Therefore, let's dedicate this chapter to exploring exactly these properties. Allow me to start with the physical dimensions of the 50-200 f2.8 Pro. The lens weighs approximately 1.2 kilograms. Compared to the OM System M.Zuiko 40-150 f2.8 Pro, this is quite a bit heavier, as the 40-150 weighs only 800 grams. Also, in terms of physical lens barrel size, the 50-200 is quite substantial. It is even a little bit bigger than my beloved M.Zuiko 100-400 Mark II. However, this physical footprint is entirely justified, given the very bright aperture of f2.8 across the whole zoom range and the superior optical quality the 50-200 f2.8 IS Pro brings to the table. The IP53 rated housing combined with internal zoom and focusing ensures that the lens not only remains operational under harsh conditions, it also ensures that small particles cannot get inside the lens barrel. I mean, a lens is not a hermetically sealed container, so things can happen, but at least it is highly unlikely to happen with the 50-200 f2.8 Pro. When you look at the lens from the outside, you immediately notice its white heat-reflective coating, which brings some very interesting properties to the table apart from heat reflection, which is very important on hot summer days. As you know, lens elements which heat up or also lens elements which cool down change their refractive indices. And this of course impacts the optical performance of every lens. And with a lens made out of the most expensive glass elements available on the market today, heat management is absolutely critical, not only to ensure high performance but also to avoid any damage or decentering to the lens assembly itself. Having said that, I'd like to highlight that most white coatings on professional lenses are durable, but they can wear off over time. Now with the 50-200 IS Pro, the opposite seems to be the case, because even after months of rigorous use in the Austrian Alps and in professional environments, I did not notice any paint coming off or any scuffs to the exterior. On top of that, I noticed that the lens barrel is very easy to clean, exhibiting kind of oleophobic properties. An often overlooked yet critical design feature of the 50-200 is its polymer front bezel. This ensures that the lens is usable even under the harshest conditions, as differential thermal expansion prevents metal filters from binding or seizing up. On top of that, it provides an additional crumple zone should you bump the lens against a hard surface. The controls the 50-200 offer are ample, to say the least. The lens's switchgear is comprised of standard switches like an autofocus limiter switch, an AF/MF switch, and of course an image stabilization toggle. But on top of that, you can find 4 equidistantly placed LFN buttons at the front lens barrel. So to be more precise, located exactly between the focusing ring and the zoom ring. And what these buttons do is actually controlled by a dedicated LFN switch. This switch allows you to either set these buttons to operate like standard LFN buttons, meaning that you can program them to do anything you want in your OM system camera, or alternatively, you can use these buttons to set a specific AF distance on the go. This feature is incredibly useful in many situations, and once you are used to that, you do not want to live without this one, believe me. Minus 12 degrees Celsius, chillingly cold wind and rapidly changing lighting conditions. Those are circumstances under which only the very best photographic equipment can shine. And shining, well, that's exactly what the 50-200 does. Let's examine its autofocus performance first. The 50-200 is capable of 50 frames per second of continuous autofocus tracking with full white balance and exposure metering for every single frame when combined with one of the latest high-end OM system bodies. It does so not only on paper but also in the real world. 50 frames per second with a 100% hit rate are not the exception but the rule with this lens. So while this is already impressive, the true capabilities of the 50-200 when it comes to focusing also lie in how it focuses. First and foremost, its field of view stays completely invariant. In other words, there is no focus breathing. The lens achieves this incredible feat by a carefully calibrated internal focusing system which significantly changes the focal length when focusing at close distances. The last fact was for the optical nerds out there, right? In reality, the only thing you have to know is that there is no focus briefing. And this makes the 50-200 an excellent choice for the professional wildlife filmmaker. On top of that, the 50-200 is also capable of very close focusing distances. It achieves equivalent magnification of 0.5 times at a focusing distance of 78 centimeters at the focal length setting of 200 millimeters. That's already impressive, but if you add the MC20 professional teleconverter by OM system, you get down to a 1-to-1 magnification. So that is real macro at 78 centimeters. And that means in practice that you've got a convenient working distance, because at 78 centimeters you are not that far away of your subject that you cannot frame it properly. And on the other hand, you just got enough distance to not cast a shadow on said subject. So really the 50-200 is a capable macro lens, and we also should keep in mind that the aberration control even at close focusing distances is outstanding. So optical quality is just there, and you're gonna get the performance you want for professional work. Even after a short period of working with the 50-200, I immediately became accustomed and, to be very frank, enamored with the industry-leading image stabilization system of this lens. The voice coil motor based system provides 5 eV of stabilization lens only at 200 mm. This goes up to 7 eV of stabilization when the lens is paired with a compatible OM system camera body, and that is of course OM system's proprietary Sync-IS technology I'm talking about. But make no mistake, even if you are a Lumix G photographer, well then you still get the 5 eV of stabilization, which is plenty. On top of that, the image stabilization system is of course completely configurable and can intelligently detect motion both vertically and horizontally, but you can also lock it in for maximum stabilization performance. It is exactly this level of configuration and adjustability that differentiates the 50-200 from the average stabilized lens. In practice, I regularly utilize the 50-200 at shutter speeds of 1/30th of a second to 1/250th of a second with absolute impunity when it comes to sharpness. Of course, these figures depend on the magnification you are photographing at, so for macro distances, of course, you have to be a bit more careful. But overall, the stabilization performance is so good that I would even name the stabilization as the main benefit over the 40-150 f2.8 Pro by OM system. Of course, the 40-150 is nowhere near as good optically as well, but what can really make or break a shot is the lack of image stabilization, because this determines whether you get a sharp image in the first place. So really the 50-200's image stabilization system is once again a true force multiplier, and combined with the right camera, it creates a camera system that is more than just the sum of its parts. To achieve the exquisite optical performance the 50-200 is capable of, OM Systems engineers designed a complex, second-to-none optical system comprised of 21 elements arranged in 13 groups, using the most expensive types of glass available today, ground to absolute perfection. Extra low dispersion spherical, super extra low dispersion, all finished with OM Systems proprietary high-end zero coating, as well as a fluorine protective coating for the front element. The 50-200 f2.8 IS Pro has it all. Now, before I explore the truly extraordinary traits of the lens, allow me to contextualize the achievements made at the design stage. Because crafting a lens on the drawing board is one side of the medal, but executing it at the production stage at scale is another. The more exquisite and exotic a lens design, the higher the production cost and the lower the economic viability for the manufacturer. History is indeed littered with examples of exotic lenses that were optically perfect but simply cost more to build than the market was willing to pay. The 50-200 might be one of those lenses, and there are a few indicators for that. First, the perfect centering, the likes of which I've only seen in the very best lenses so far. And second, the perfectly uniform spatial frequency response in all directions. Again, second to none. Both of these traits suggest minimum sample variation, which is only achievable by every single lens being inspected and bench tested by a technician and afterwards fine-tuned. So with this context established, allow me to transition to the detailed optical analysis. Let's start with spatial frequency response. This is the contrast performance of the lens. I've tested the 50-200 with an IMX sensor, which is used in the OM1 series and the OM3 series cameras. So these metrics are indicative of system resolving power. Let's start with maximum MTF50, which exceeds 123 line pairs per millimeter. This figure rivals the very best prime lenses in existence, but the true performance is likely even higher, but cannot be measured as current sensors lack the pixel density to do so reliably. Now at a focal length of 50mm and f4, I've been able to measure MTF50 surpassing 1600 line pairs per picture height, and at 200mm f4, this figure is still 1500 line pairs per picture height. So these numbers tell us two things. First, at the wide end from f4 onward, the system operates as close to the diffraction limit as possible. And second, zooming does not visibly impact image quality. But what is even more remarkable as these astounding values is the consistency of the spatial frequency response across the entire frame. There is only negligible fall-off towards the edges, barely detectable. And this is, of course, of high importance, because many lenses are very sharp in the center, but only the very best lenses are sharp across the whole frame. As a brief aside, when I saw these results, I immediately looked for the catch. No optic is perfect, and lens design is always a balancing act. You solve the optical issues that ruin an image, and you strategically accept the ones that don't. So my skepticism was triggered, and I set out to find the truth. What specific choices did OM Systems engineers actually make to pull this off? So let's dive deeper and look at longitudinal chromatic aberrations first. Throughout its entire zoom range and under normal temperatures, the 50-200 behaves as a true apochromat. Only by utilizing unreasonably long testing distances, I was able to detect some separation of the red, green and blue channels, which actually do not result in visible color fringing, as their projected circles of confusion are considerably smaller than the airy disks for their respective wavelengths. Bottom line, longitudinal chromatic aberrations are perfectly corrected, meaning that the color channels red, green and blue focus essentially at the same distance, ensuring superb color accuracy and overall contrast transfer performance. But what about lateral chromatic aberrations? Here, the situation is slightly more nuanced. Lateral chromatic aberrations are indeed detectable at the extreme corners. This is one of the minuscule compromises OM System has made when conceptualizing this lens. However, the error is so small that it is trivial in practice and corrected by the image processing engine of OM System cameras anyway. But even if left uncorrected, you'd be hard-pressed to see this small deviation in the extreme corners even when printing very, very big. Now let's take a look at monochromatic aberrations next. My specific copy reaches peak performance when stopped down slightly, and that, given the otherwise optical perfection of the lens, indicates the presence of residual chromatic aberrations. So as I already hinted at, I arrived at this finding not by measuring the aberrations directly, but applying the principle of exclusion. Why? Because the deviations are so minute that they fall below the detection threshold of standard lab tests. Now let's talk about illumination fall-off next, because most zoom lenses in this angle of view range show clear weaknesses when it comes to vignetting. But the 50-200 is an exception to the rule. There is only a negligible maximum fall-off of minus 0.85 exposure values at 200mm detectable. And this is industry leading. It mitigates the need for digital brightening, which always comes at the price of lower signal-to-noise ratio. So really, this is absolutely exciting. It allows you to crop anywhere in the frame, and you do not have to accept any loss of fidelity just because of the excellent vignetting performance of the 50-200. Now I'd say we've arrived at a point where we can come to an optical performance verdict. Earlier I mentioned the delicate balancing act that defines lens design. It appears that the engineers at OM System did not merely keep their footing, they struck a perfect equilibrium and indeed squared the circle. The 50-200 delivers performance that is, quite frankly, almost too good to be true. Let's be very clear. An IMX272 camera armed with the 50-200 competes with imaging systems with sensors 4 times the size. Of course, these considerable optical reserves destine the 50-200 to be used with teleconverters. Both the MC14 and the MC20 feel like mandatory purchases for the owners of the 50-200. As we saw in a previous chapter, even the MC20 causes only moderate degradation, making the 50-200 a veritable alternative to the 100-400 Mark II super telephoto lens. And always keep in mind, the 100-400 Mark II is capable of very impressive image quality, which makes the performance of the 50-200 with the MC20 even more impressive. From an engineering standpoint, the optic is a triumph, combining the rendering fidelity of a prime lens with the pragmatic versatility of a zoom without resorting to digital sleight of hand. From a micro four thirds photographer standpoint, the 50-200 IS Pro is a force multiplier for the entire system, bridging the gap to super telephoto with absolute authority. Make no mistake, this lens does not compete on the triviality of size. It competes on the absolute purity of its optical output. It proves that this system can produce instruments that are quite simply peerless. However, possessing an instrument of this precision is only the beginning. Mastering it is a different discipline entirely. To assist you in that journey, I have prepared a suite of additional resources. First, for those who require the raw data, my comprehensive written review is available on my website, featuring expanded datasets not covered here. Second, for those dedicated to attaining true proficiency, I invite you to access the exclusive live discussion for channel members, as well as my in-depth seminar, specifically designed to fast-track your mastery of this optic. You will find the links in the description below. I also invite you to connect with me on other social platforms for more insights and creative inspiration. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.